Hey guys, welcome back to All Cooking, No BS, where we mostly cook and do a very small amount of BS, maybe not none. This week is a recipe that I'm super excited about because this is the first thing that I ever made for my wife Valerie, and I still to this day believe that it's probably the reason she fell in love with me. So this is chicken and dumplings. As classic as that, as simple as that, comfort food. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. I think the way to everybody's heart is through their stomach. So let's get it started. The first thing we need to do here is actually to make a chicken broth. That's the base of chicken and dumplings, this super flavorful broth. So to start it, we have a little bit of vegetable in front of us. So I have half an onion here. Just take the end of it off and cut it into some wedges. Nothing crazy. Throw it in my pot beside me. I have a couple carrots, well 3 carrots technically, though they're little carrots. So probably 2 normal sized carrots. Just kind of trim the ends of these off so that you don't have too much of the skin left, and then they can kind of just get cut into chunks as well. I have sort of 3 small celery stalks here. Let's trim this bottom part off because it's a little dirty. Trim off the tops for the same reason. Chuck those aside. Kind of cut these in half as well. And then some bay leaves, fresh bay leaves. I prefer the fresh ones. You can use the dry, just not as much flavor to them. And then a little bit of fresh thyme. So all that goes in our pot. And I know what you're thinking. We're missing a key ingredient. I have it. It's right here. This is our chicken. This is our poulet rouge fermier. So this is a heritage breed chicken, meaning that this is one of the kind of old ones. Like, tastes more like chicken? You be the judge. You can absolutely make this with any kind of chicken you get in your grocery store. This is just a favorite of mine from Joyce Farms, and I buy it at Whole Foods. So let's break it down, and I'll show you what we're going to do, because we're going to break it down in a very particular way to get the most out of the meat and the bones. So let's do that. All right, guys, so we have our chicken along with our vegetables in our pot. So as a reminder, that's the 2 legs, the 2 thighs, the wings, and then the actual carcass of it, the backbone and the rib cage. All of that is in here. We took the breasts, which we took off of the cage, and we set those aside. We're going to use those later on, but they don't need to cook as long, so they're not going in to start. We're going to cover this with water, and just enough water, by the way, that it just tops over the meat itself. Not all the way up to the top of the pot. It'll be too diluted. Just to cover the meat. Put it on the stove, put a lid on it and bring it to a boil, and let's get it up to a light simmer. And as soon as we reach that simmer, we're gonna turn it down to as low as our stove will go, and we're gonna let it sit. How long? 3 or 4 hours. This is where the time comes into it. But as it simmers, we'll go ahead and work on our dumplings. Okay guys, while our chicken is simmering and making our stock, let's go ahead and do our dumplings. In this food processor bowl, I have 1.5 cups of self-rising white lily flour. Why? Because that's the way that my granny made it. I also have 1/4 cup of fat, in this case lard. Again, you could use Crisco or you could even use butter if you wanted to, but the way I had them growing up, they were made with lard. And then I'm gonna add to this as well 1/4 cup of buttermilk. Now this is whole fat buttermilk, so a little bit different than the low fat or skim milk variety, but just a little bit richer. So let's add that in here. And we'll keep this open because we may need a little bit more of it, hard to say. And then we'll add a nice big pinch of salt, which by the way, measuring out, I've done this before, 1 pinch of salt for me is about 2 teaspoons. So let's pop this on. Alright guys, let's look at this. This looks pretty good to me. So, I got this ball, and then I got a little bit of leftover flour, but that's actually perfect because we're going to just start working this in. Now, like I said, you really cannot overwork this dough, and in fact, I think it's a little bit better if you do really give it the business. So don't feel like you're worried. This is not a biscuit. We're not worried about this being, oh man, we're going to make it super tough if we work it. That's not what we have going on here. A little work is going to make this hold up in the liquid much, much better. This is our dumpling dough, and it's nice and pliable, nice and spongy. That's what we're looking for here. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of clean this up, roll it out, and we're going to cut this into nice small pieces. But for now, while we're waiting for our chicken to cook, we're just going to put this in a bowl, put some plastic wrap over it, set it aside. Okay guys, so our chicken is done. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So this is our pot. We have our chicken in here. We haven't disturbed it. We haven't moved it around or anything. But if I pull this out, you guys can see that the meat will fall off of this super, super easy. That's what we're looking for here. So now, what we want to do is take our 2 chicken legs and our 2 chicken thighs, and we want to set those aside. So what I want to do is wrap up the chicken that we pulled out, let it cool to room temperature so I can pick the meat, but I'm going to take this and pour it through a colander and put it right back in the pot. So in other words, get rid of all the bones, get rid of all the vegetables, just save the broth. We have our broth now strained out. So all the vegetables, all the bones out of it, that's what's in this pot right here. Now, remember, we set the breast aside. I just popped them in the fridge while we were waiting here. So this is the breast with the tender and the skin still intact. And I want to take this now and drop this into our hot broth. We don't need to turn this back on. We can just take this and put the lid on it, and we're going to let this sit now again for about 20 minutes. And what's going to happen here is that we're going to poach the breast. The breast, the flavor of it in broth is, well, it's not really useful. And if you cook it until it shreds apart, it also doesn't taste like anything. But if we let it sit in this warm broth until it's just cooked through, we'll retain all of its juices and we'll end up with something with a much, much better texture. Let's go ahead and roll out our dumplings. So here's our dough right here. Just grab this. Now let's just put a little bit of flour on our board. Flatten this out just a little bit. And then we'll grab our rolling pin here and we'll work this thing more flat. Alright, so this is super thin. You guys can see it's not very thick at all. So what we're going to do now is just kind of cut it into squares. They don't have to be perfect. My grannies never were. Use a thin knife, something that's got a really, really sharp edge to it. Or even better yet, use a pizza cutter. Has our meat again from our thigh, from our leg. It's just been shredded. Let's pull this breast out. Set that on here. We'll let it cool just a little bit and then I'll chop it up. But in the meantime, let's cook our dumplings. So, turn our stove all the way up to high, pop our lid back on. I need this liquid to be at a rolling boil before we ever add our dumplings so they don't stick together. Stock's at a rolling boil, you can see from all that steam. Start adding our dumplings in. Easiest way for me is just to kind of pick them up with the edge of my knife and start kicking them in there. Okay, all the dumplings are in. Just grab our tongs here real fast. Give it a very, very quick but gentle stir. We don't want to break them up too much. Now let's pop the lid on, turn it down to low. This is going to sit for about 8 to 10 minutes until the dumplings are fully cooked through. I'll open it back up and I'll show you what a cooked one is when it's ready. When they're done, they just kind of float on the top here. They're nice and tender. They're not too stiff. And they're super, super savory from the pork lard in there. So, to wrap this thing up, we need to add our chicken, we got to add our seasonings, and then I also want to add another ingredient here. Now, this seems a bit like gilding the lily, maybe, but this was my addition to my grandmother's recipe. A classic liaison. This is a French technique for enriching sauces. And so what I have in here is 2 egg yolks and 2 ounces of heavy cream. And I'm just giving that a whisk to combine it all together here. Then I'm going to take a ladle and I'm going to ladle some of my hot stock into this mixture just to temper it so it doesn't scramble. Maybe just a little bit more. Now, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pour it back into my mixture here, and it's really going to increase how rich it is. Nice thin stream. Let's give it a taste. Man, you'd be amazed how much richer that is with just that little bit of addition right there. Now, I want to add a couple other things. We haven't seasoned this yet, so it's time to add a nice big pinch of salt in here. And when I say a big one, I mean a big pinch of salt, like heavy hand. Give that a stir through. Let's also add some black pepper. Now, my family likes it with a lot of black pepper. Perfect. And then finally, let's add to it our cooked chicken right here. All of the juice that's reserved from it and all of the meat back in here. That looks beautiful. Now ideally, I like to stir this through, put the lid on this, and then I like to leave my chicken and dumplings to cool down a little bit. I think it's hard to eat when it's too hot. So I have the heat off here, and I'm gonna let this sit for another 20 or 30 minutes before I'm ready to serve it. Hey guys, so that's our chicken and dumplings, classic comfort food, using my granny's recipe with only a couple little chefy tweaks to it. It certainly made somebody fall in love with me. I hope it does the same for you guys. I'll see you back here next week. Take care.